have got to know whether or not they're president to trust.
Read my lips.
American people have voted to make a new beginning.
There is no limit to the greatness of America.
Yes, we can.
Hi there, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm still Chaz Licciardello.
And coming up, a wrap of the vice presidential debate, and we'll also ask a leading Christian conservative whether he thinks America is ready for a Mormon president.
We're going to find out which wars we can expect to be enlisted in over the next 4 years as we talk foreign policy with Michael Fuller-Love. But first, let's get some news on.
Heading the news from Planet America this week, the town of Danville, Kentucky, population 1,621, played host to today's one-off debate between Vice President Joe Biden and Congressman Paul Ryan. After last week's strong showing by Mitt Romney, there was extra interest in how the running mates would fare. Here are some of the highlights.
When we equivocate on our values, when we show that we're cutting our own defense, it makes us more weak. It projects weakness, and when we look weak, our adversaries are much more willing to test us. They're more brazen in their attacks, and our allies are less willing to trust us.
With all due respect, that's a bunch of malarkey.
And why is that so?
Because not a single thing he said is accurate.
Let's look at this from the view of the Ayatollahs. What do they see? They see this administration trying to water down sanctions in Congress, try to stop us from putting the tough sanctions in place. Now we have them in place because of Congress. They say the military option's on the table, but it's not being viewed as credible.
It's incredible.
we both,
Vice President
I don't want to go into classified stuff, but we both agree that to do this peacefully, you got to get them to change their minds.
This is a bunch of stuff. Look, here's the deal.
What does that mean, a bunch of stuff?
Well, it means it's simply inaccurate.
It's Irish.
It's Irish. It is. We Irish call it malarkey.
Thanks for the translation.
No, we Irish call it malarkey. Iran is more isolated today than when we took office. It was on the ascendancy when we took office. It is totally isolated. I don't know what world these guys are in.
Thank heavens we have these sanctions in place. It's in spite of their opposition.
Oh, God.
They've given 20 waivers to this sanction. And all I have to point to are the results. They're 4 years closer toward a nuclear weapon.
ABC correspondent Craig McMurtry joined us from Washington a short time ago for his take on the debate. This was a pretty feisty vice presidential debate. What did you make of it?
I thought it was good theatre for political tragics like me. I think it was enthralling for 90 minutes, far livelier than the Barack Obama-Mitt Romney debate we saw last week. I think both men threw enough red meat for their supporters to go out afterwards claiming victory in this debate. I'm not sure it's going to change the dynamic of the race terribly much.
Craig, again, it seemed that the older candidate, this time Joe Biden, had maybe taken a couple of shots of vitamin B or something. He was really fired up. Did he cross the line? Was he just a little bit too Joe Biden?
Joe Biden is Joe Biden, I suppose. The interesting use of the malarkey expression clearly delighted his supporters.
3 times, I think,
and he enjoyed that, threw his arms around a bit. But look, that's who Joe Biden is. He's a colourful character. I particularly liked when he leaned Brock back in his chair, threw his arms up as he was mocking Republicans for criticising Barack Obama and the Obama administration for the state of the economy, mocking them by saying that, look, it was like the recession fell out of the sky when this man, pointing across the desk to Paul Ryan, Mitt Romney's running mate, was one of those who voted for 2 wars and put them on the credit card. So, look, he was colourful. He was probably smiling a little too much at times in the beginning. I actually thought he was a little bit nervous at the beginning when the 42-year-old Republican congressman was really attacking the administration over its foreign policy record, suggesting that the administration had been weak on Syria, on Iran, particularly attacking the Obama administration over Libya, and that deadly attack on the US consulate in Benghazi, saying that the administration took too long to acknowledge that it was in fact a terrorist strike, and also criticising the administration for ignoring, really, requests for more security at the post. But once matters turned to the economy, Joe Biden was much, much stronger, and unlike Barack Obama, he didn't hesitate to raise Governor Romney's now infamous 47% remark, where he suggested that many Americans won't take personal responsibility for their lives, a comment that Mitt Romney's been walking back since. And tonight, Paul Ryan said, look, sometimes words come out wrong, and he managed to turn that into a laugh line because, of course, Joe Biden is notorious for a few gaffes of his own.
So, obviously, there was a bit of pre-scripting here, using words like malarkey rather than liar for the guy sitting across the table to you, clearly calculated, again, pivoting that 47% into a way of kind of, attacking Joe Biden. At the end of all of that, we like to say, is there a clear winner in all of this? Did anybody come out on top?
I don't think there's a clear winner. I'm sure both sides would disagree with me. I think, though, if you look at the task that Paul Ryan was facing, this is the biggest national stage he has had. His main mission was not to screw up, not to make a big mistake, and he held his own against the very experienced Joe Biden. So in that sense, I suppose it's mission accomplished for Paul Ryan. But already, if you look at the web and instant responses, the Democrat faithful have been heartened by a much feistier appearance by the Vice President, by Joe Biden tonight. They were disheartened by Barack Obama's performance last week. The President has said in the last few moments that he's proud of Joe Biden's performance, and certainly the Obama-Biden campaign team will be hoping that this helps arrest what has been a campaign surge for Mitt Romney. Not entirely clear it's solely because of that first debate performance, but there has definitely been a tightening in this race over the past week.
Craig McMurtry, thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
And today's running mate debate came at the end of Republican Mitt Romney's best week yet of this campaign. Following his dominant performance in last week's first presidential debate, Governor Romney surged ahead in national polls, recording his best head-to-head numbers in almost a year. Romney now leads in the average of polls by just under 1%, with just 3.5 weeks until Election Day. The second presidential debate, it's a town hall-style event at Hofstra University in New York next Wednesday, lunchtime our time. Mitt Romney made what was billed as a major speech this week on foreign policy at the Virginia Military Institute. In it, he called for a more assertive approach against Iran's nuclear program and a greater US naval presence. And he promised to help the Syrian rebel forces fighting against the Assad regime.
In Syria, I'll work with our partners to identify and organize those members of the opposition who share our values, and then ensure that they obtain the arms they need to defeat Assad's tanks and helicopters and fighter jets.
The Republican candidate vowed to keep defence spending above 4% of GDP. It's currently at 4.5%, but it is due to fall below 3% within 5 years.
And that spending promise, plus also the Syrian policies that we heard about, they're certainly different to Obama, no doubt about that. But it's probably arguable that his Iranian policy, on the other hand, only differs from Obama's in rhetoric. Mm-hmm. And there is a big difference in rhetoric, but I'm not sure much else. But we'll be talking more about that to Michael Fuller-Love later on.
Indeed we will. The US House of Representatives Government Oversight Committee is investigating last month's attack on the American consulate in Benghazi, Libya. You remember 4 Americans died, including Ambassador Chris Stevens. House Republicans are accusing the State Department of cutting corners on security and the Obama administration of misleading the public about what exactly happened there. There was a boost for American job seekers and the Obama administration late last week, with much better than expected unemployment figures for the month of September. The jobless rate now stands at 7.8%, down from 8.1% in August, and that is the lowest level since President Obama came to office back in January 2009. But that number only tells part of the story. We'll have more on the real unemployment picture, and it's still not good. That's later in the program. Last week's strong debate performance has seen Mitt Romney surging in a series of national polls this week after trailing by around 4% just 2 weeks ago. A tracking poll from Gallup today has Governor Romney 1 percentage point in front, and a standalone poll from Fox News has come to pretty much the same conclusion, 1%. And Pew Research on Monday had the Republican jumping to a 4 percentage point lead. The battleground state polls are also showing significant movement, but also some more volatility. In Ohio, NBC has Obama up by 6 percentage points. Rasmussen has the president leading by just 1. Gravis has Romney up by 1. In Virginia, NBC has Romney leading by 1. CBS has Obama still 5 percentage points clear. Go to Florida, and a new poll from the Miami Herald out just in the last couple of hours has Mitt Romney surging to a 7 percentage point lead in that crucial battleground state. And with all of those polls factored in, the Electoral College map has tightened significantly. Barack Obama still in a winning position above the magic number of 270, but with Governor Romney now within striking distance in Ohio, Wisconsin and Michigan, and 2 of those 3 states in November in his column would give him the White House.
Few polls have caught my eye, John. As always, Romney's doing very well at the moment, as you say. But when you look at the fine print, both candidates have some glaring weaknesses still. If we go to the laptop, 62% to 35% say Romney is promising more than he can deliver. And that includes 75% of swing voters. And 53% to 44% say it's hard to know what Romney really stands for, including 66% of swing voters. In other words, he's a sitting duck for a flip-flopper ad campaign. So you expect that coming soon. By contrast, if Romney wants to go for the throat, no surprises, it's the economy that he needs to talk about. If we go to the laptop again, 54% say Obama doesn't know how to turn the economy around. Given the last 4 years, you can see why they'd think that. Although for me, the most interesting aspect of that Pew poll was the likability numbers. Now, this is something that we've talked about a lot in the past, because Mitt Romney used to have horrible likability numbers. He was in the 30s for most of the year. Now have a look. He's actually overtaken Obama, 50 to 49. Now, even though Romney is at the top of his bounce right now, that's still pretty amazing stuff. Obama would be fairly nervous about that one, I expect. Finally, Democrats like to talk about how Romney was secretly recorded suggesting 47% of the country don't pay federal taxes and they're addicted to welfare. We've heard the 47% endlessly.
Sure.
But according to YouGov polling, only 22% of Americans think he was talking about them. Now, that is great news for Romney, because that's only the case, of course, because Americans are thoroughly confused about how their tax system works, his payroll taxes, income taxes. What is he talking about? And if you want to know why they're generally so confused, why not enjoy what passes for political ads in 2012?
Bernie Madoff, Ken Lay, Dennis Kozlowski, criminals, gluttons of greed, and the evil genius who towered over them, one man has the guts to speak his name.
Big Bird. Big Bird. Big Bird.
It's me, Big Bird.
Big, yellow, a menace to our economy. Mitt Romney knows it's not Wall Street you have to worry about, it's Sesame Street.
I'm going to stop the subsidy to PBS.
Mitt Romney, taking on our enemies no matter where they nest.
Despite his surge in the polls this week, one of the lingering questions about Mitt Romney in the minds of many Republicans is whether he's conservative enough. And during the primary campaign earlier this year, Governor Romney also had problems winning over Christian conservatives, and they make up a major chunk of the Republican Party's base. There is a long history of animosity between some evangelical Christians and people of the Mormon faith. The question is, will they be united in their opposition to Barack Obama come November, or will enough of them just stay at home to maybe cost the Republicans the White House? Gary Bauer is one of the most influential Christian conservative leaders in the United States. He's a former advisor to Ronald Reagan. He ran for the presidency himself in the year 2000. So we're just about a month out now from the presidential election. The president is about 3% in front, according to the average of national polls. How are Republicans feeling right now?
Yeah, well, as you know, there's a huge controversy about the composition of the polls, and of course, when you're behind in those, the favorite thing to say is the only poll that matters is in November, and so that would be my lead comment. The important thing is what happens when all those folks go to vote. Look, I think he's held his own. I think it's a 2 or 3 point election. Theoretically, I still see a very real possibility, not particularly a positive possibility, but a very real possibility that on election night, we may not have just one Florida, referring to the contentious argument over who won that state a few elections ago, but 4 or 5 Floridas. It's a narrowly divided country, and so I think it's going to be it's going to be a hot campaign and maybe even a hot couple of weeks after the election.
So is there any sense of buyer's remorse about Mitt Romney? For a long time, a lot of Conservatives, you included, were really hoping for a nominee who was anybody but Mitt Romney. You got him. Are you concerned?
Mm-hmm. You know, I endorsed Rick Santorum in the primaries, and I don't think it's any secret. Governor Romney would certainly admit to this too. Most pro-family, pro-life, values voters, as we call them, did prefer a number of other candidates. At the end of the day, however, Mitt Romney ran an entire primary campaign in which he repeatedly assured those voters that he was with them on major issues. I guess, you know, if it doesn't work out on Election Day, there's always a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking that goes on after that, people second-guessing it all. But I think the voters knew who they were getting, and he certainly showed the ability to raise the necessary money you need for a presidential campaign. It will be interesting to see what would happen in the next cycle, though, and whether the party, you know, which direction the party swings after this election, whatever happens.
Because that's a frequent refrain from Conservatives that sort of say whether it's Mitt Romney, John McCain, Bob Dole, we nominated somebody who was too moderate and they lost. We should have given the Conservative a go.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, particularly in the case of Senator Dole and Senator McCain, both of whom are personal friends of mine, it was not only that they came across as moderates, but there was a sense at the grassroots that they just didn't give it as good as they got it. I mean, you know, if you're going to be in politics and you're going to be in this rough and tumble game, it's not a chess match. It's more like a back alley brawl. The Democrats seem to understand that. Our guys sometimes seem to be more interested in everybody saying, gee, he's a nice guy, than they do in actually saying, gee, he got elected president. So I think some of it's ideological and some of it is just people looking for candidates that will, without hesitancy, strongly defend the values of conservatism and Republican values.
When you ran for president yourself in 2000, you tapped into the evangelical Christian vote, particularly in the Midwest, places like Iowa and so on. Those are the people that some people are concerned won't ever vote for a Mormon candidate. There's sort of tensions between an evangelical and the Mormons. Is that a concern, do you think?
It's certainly been written about a lot, speculated about a lot. As I travel around the country speaking to churches and some of these community organizations and so forth, I'm just not picking it up. Now, maybe it exists in some areas of the country, and I'm just not seeing that. I think that voting group of all the constituency parts of the Republican Party will turn out in record numbers, quite frankly, because whatever misgivings they have about faith differences with Governor Romney, these people look at the last 4 years and are absolutely convinced that 4 more years of Barack Obama and the country may be irretrievable, both economically and also on some of the values issues that they care about so deeply. This is a very decent country. That decency led them to vote for the first man of color to be president of the United States. There was a deep hope among the body politic that his election would help sort of lance the boil of racial discrimination and bring together people in the country. And I think even now, even though he's failed in many ways, there are still a lot of Americans that may not be happy with his performance, but I think may not be comfortable with voting against the re-election of the first man of color.
It seems that this has been a campaign more than most that has been dominated by gaffes from both sides, but Mitt Romney's 47% gaffe has been getting a lot of attention. Is that going to be a big problem for him, do you think?
Yeah, we know, first of all, there seem to be more gaffes, but I think that's probably more a reflection of the age we live in. That is, there's nowhere you can be and assume you're only talking to the person that you're looking at. Between cell phones and all sorts of other electronic devices, just about everything you say can be videoed and recorded and so forth. Look, it is beyond argument, I believe, that the Democratic Party, through the programs it develops, will, when it runs in a campaign, remind the recipients of those programs that if they, the Democrats, are not reelected, that program may be cut back. That is a major part of every Democratic presidential campaign since I was old enough to follow American politics, and I can't imagine that will ever change. So there is not only a germ of truth, there is a great deal of truth to the idea that if you're dependent on government, the Democrats will remind you they developed the program, they are overfunding the program, and you should vote for them. I think if Governor Romney had it to do over again, the mistake he made was probably the 47% number. Because the 47% number is an exaggeration. There aren't 47% of the country that are not paying taxes, that are somehow living off of everybody else. There are older people who did pay taxes all their working lives and are now retired, might be getting Social Security. There's lots of other different parts of the population that would fit into that category. So I think if Governor Romney would have said, look, we've got a significant number of voters now who depend on checks from Washington, D.C., and I'm telling people they need to tighten their belts. So I really can't base a campaign on getting many of their votes. But I do believe I can go to the other part of America that go to work every day, play by the rules, pay their bills, sacrifice, etc. And I believe we're going to get the overwhelming majority of them, and that's going to be my campaign strategy.
Gary Bauer, many thanks indeed for joining us on Planet America.
My pleasure.
Stop! John Dennis?
Nancy.
John Dennis.
Dude? She is not a sacrificial lamb. And neither am I. You're strangling job creation, Miss Pelosi. You're burying us alive under a mountain of debt.
Or do you want 500 million Americans to lose their jobs?
500 million? You voted to detain American citizens indefinitely. I wouldn't have voted for that.
Are you serious? Are you serious?
I am. John Dennis, and I approve this message.
It's a strange, strange ad. Now, I'd like to return to those unemployment figures for a sec, because they were a little odd. Only 114,000 jobs were created last month, which barely keeps up with population growth, and the participation rate went up, which means more people were looking for work. So, not many jobs created, lots of people looking for jobs. And yet, the unemployment rate dropped 0.3%, which is huge. That's happened like 7 times in the last 20 years. So how does that work? Well, if you're a hack like former GE boss Jack Welch, you might say this.
You say these Chicago guys will do anything, so they change the numbers. Do you want to take that back?
No,
this is an assertion that there was jimming with these numbers. There was corruption here, an infiltration, or getting to the... It's not funny, Jack. You're talking about the President of the United States playing with the Bureau of Behavioral Statistics numbers. This is Nixon stuff. This is what Nixon did back in the old days. He accused him of doing this.
Chris, don't lose it now.
I'm not losing it. Look at my face. I'm not losing it.
Too much yelling. But in reality, what's happening is that the jobs number and the unemployment rate actually come from 2 different surveys. There's one survey called the Household Survey, which asks people if they worked in the last week. That's a survey they use to calculate the unemployment rate, the 7.8% figure. And it has a margin of error of 0.1%. So the real unemployment rate might actually be 0.1% higher than we think. Now, a second survey is called the Employer Survey. Now, that asks employers how many people they are employing, and that's used to work out the number of jobs created in the month. That's the 114,000 new jobs figure. Now, that has a margin of error of 108,000. That's a lot of jobs, which means for all we know, they might actually have been 220,000 jobs created this month. So what's probably happened is the unemployment numbers is probably halfway between the 2 figures. And the real unemployment rate's probably more like 7.9 or 8%. And yes, that is still a great result. But no, Jack Welch, it's not rigged. Read on and turn.
Now, let's stay on the subject of jobs for the minute. Arnie Kalleberg is Professor of Sociology at the University of North Carolina. He's the author of the book Good Jobs, Bad Jobs. He says that addressing the employment problem in the United States requires a fundamentally new approach to job security and training as well. Arnie Kalleberg was in Australia recently as a guest of the United States Study Centre at the University of Sydney. Why is it so high still? More than 3 years after the recession came to an end, Wall Street's at 5-year highs, companies are making record profits again, but it's been this jobless recovery.
Yes, and the capital is sitting on the sidelines. Banks are not lending because interest rates are so low. One of the reasons why companies are making these huge profits is because they're not hiring workers. They're able, because of technological change, they're able to do more with less. And so they're waiting for what they say greater certainty in the market.
But this has been happening for 2 years now. The employment rate's basically been matching population and not going up at all.
Right.
2 years is a long time to wait for certainty.
There's a bit of gamesmanship now in terms of will the Republicans come in? Will they cut taxes? And that would presumably create more jobs. But it's not only uncertainty, but it's also a basic lack of demand in the economy, produced by the fact that the housing crisis is still not resolved, and people just don't have enough cash in their pockets to spend on things. It's starting to get better, but it's still a long way to go.
So would you say then that if you want to solve the unemployment crisis, first you have to solve the housing crisis?
Yes, the housing crisis is key. In the past 20, 30 years, a lot of the American boom was driven by, it was a debt-driven boom, as people borrowed against their houses, because we know that housing prices can never go down until they do. And so people were borrowed against housing. That was their piggy bank. That was their hope for retirement. And now, because of the foreclosures and because of the difficulty in getting the decline in housing prices, people are not have the money to spend.
And yet you hear very often that from advocates of housing reform, etc., that Obama's been dragging his heels a little bit on this issue, even though there's things he could do unilaterally as a president. Why do you think that is?
Well, there are a lot of competing pressures on him. It's not clear that he could magically change the housing crisis. The Federal Reserve, though, is now have with their new plan of putting $40 billion a month into the economy, is trying to address this in a very rigorous and aggressive way.
And you think that will work, what they're talking about in the last couple of weeks?
I think so. I think that's going to definitely make a difference, and it's going to increase. The unemployment's been high for the past 2 years, but it's really, the problem is really in the public sector rather than the private sector. The private sector is continuing to create jobs. It's the public sector, because of the reduction in budgets in state and local governments, that's where the unemployment is really had become very intractable. School teachers, police and firemen, and public servants of various kinds don't have jobs.
How much political blame can be laid at the feet of Republicans for slowing this recovery down, and is that purely because they don't want the economy to improve under Barack Obama?
Well, the Senate Majority Leader famously came out and said that his goal was to prevent Obama from getting a second term. And so there's been a lot of opposition to jobs bills that Obama and the Democrats have put forward that would have created jobs in that way. But they basically argue that because of the federal debt, at this point we should embrace austerity. As opposed to investing in the economy. And we know from countries like Europe that austerity doesn't necessarily work, and especially in a time like this, we need to invest. But the Republicans don't like that position. They basically are arguing that we need to worry about the debt. We need to cut back spending rather than invest at this point. When
politicians aren't blaming each other, they often blame outsourcing. That's a very common straw man, the thump. Outsourcing was around 5 years ago when the unemployment rate was a lot lower. So my question is outsourcing actually a factor, or is it completely political harumph?
I think outsourcing is relatively a small factor. Outsourcing insourcing, generally, there are only certain types of jobs that can be outsourced. It really is important in the manufacturing sector, but the manufacturing sector is a relatively small part of the economy now. Now, indeed, we have insourcing, where a number of companies, manufacturing companies, are bringing jobs back into the United States. But it's a nice scapegoat. You can blame China for stealing our jobs, but it's really a relatively small part of the larger problem.
Something I always wonder is, with America, with the unemployment rate, we forget that in Australia, you can get unemployment insurance or payments for as long as you want. In America, it's time limited, sometimes as little as 26 weeks.
Right.
What happens to these people when they drop off the rolls? Is there any safety net at all, or are they just on their own?
That's a great question, and that's one of the problems of the United States. One of the characteristics of the current unemployment crisis is that the proportion of workers who have been unemployed for a long period of time is the largest it's been ever since the Great Depression. In fact, now over 30% of workers have been unemployed for more than a year. Of the unemployed workers, 30% have been unemployed for more than a year. Congress has passed extensions to unemployment insurance because of the crisis, but the amount of replacement that you get from these is relatively small. And the major problem is that when you lose your job, you often lose your health insurance. And as strange as it might seem to Australians and people in the rest of the world, not everybody gets health insurance. And that's why the Affordable Care Act was so important symbolically, if not in reality, because it hasn't kicked in yet. You feel inadequate, your family puts pressure on it, you run out of money at some point, and then you're subject to complaints from the Republicans. For example, Mitt Romney's famous 47%. These guys are regarded as being irresponsible for not working.
Time to kick around some of the top stories of the week at the roundish table, and here to do exactly that, Executive Director of the Lowy Institute, Dr. Michael Fullilove. Dr. Michael Fullilove, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, today's vice presidential debate, we heard earlier from Craig McMurtry, kind of called it as a draw. Biden was certainly feisty. Paul Ryan held his own. How did you see it?
I thought Ryan had his nose in front, actually. I am. In the long term, I'm immune to Joe Biden's charms. I think he's the world's greatest ham. And he sort of showed that, you know, and he was constantly hanging his head and shaking his head and smiling and laughing. And I thought it was actually condescending. And so I actually thought Ryan had more to do, because he's the 42-year-old guy who's trying to step up into these shoes. And certainly on foreign policy, given that he's got very little experience, he sounded reasonably credible.
On the substance of it, there was Martha Raddatz was the moderator. She's a foreign policy expert.
She was great, I thought.
And much more interventionist than Jim Lehrer was, in a different format, admittedly, last week. But she really controlled it, but also directed it to your strength as well. Foreign policy, an awful lot. Surprised a lot of people. You?
Yes, and in fact I was watching it thinking this is a cracker of a debate, much better, I think, than the debate last week between Obama and Romney. And I myself...
It was an actual debate this time.
It was an actual debate, and I was thinking, wouldn't it be great to have a foreign policy debate in Australia during the federal election campaign? Because we also face big foreign policy issues. But to have that sort of engagement between those two leaders, I thought was fantastic.
Were there any moments in particular that stood out to you, or was it just a generally good vibe, you think?
I thought, look, I thought Ryan drew strong contrasts on the rhetoric and on the sort of the shape of the foreign policy. This line about Obama's foreign policy unravelling, I think, is untrue, but it is a point that has some merit to it. I thought on the substantive points, again, I didn't find massive differences. You saw in Syria, for example, Ryan was very critical of Biden for all the Syrians who've died while the Obama administration had been going through the UN and all the rest of it. And yet, when it came down to would Americans ever inject troops into Syria, Ryan stepped back from that very quickly. So I think partly because of the temperament of Romney, which I think is going to be more cautious than people think, and partly because of the new limits on America's freedom of action and the fact that they're running out of dough apart from anything else, and they're running out, they don't want to be engaging in new land wars. I actually thought the debate showed something about the foreign policy debate in general during the campaign, which is that the similarities are at least as striking as the differences.
We'll be talking a lot more about foreign policy in a second, but just before we move back to it, I just wanted to pick up on something you were saying before about Joe Biden's condescending nature, which I actually agree with.
Yeah.
But what a question is, was that something that he might have had to do? Because Obama was so passive last time, the Democrats were demoralised, all the polls suggested that the enthusiasm went right down amongst the Democrats.
Yeah.
Maybe this debate was just about cheering up Democrats. And even if they don't win any independents at all, just getting Democrats excited again, and Joe Biden rolling his eyes, and I think it got Democrats excited.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any merit to that?
Yeah, I do. Look, I mean, he did the full Biden, didn't he? It was the full Biden, and he did it. And yes, there'd be a lot of people behind him whooping and very excited about that. I think both of them did, in a sense, what they had to do. I mean, Biden got out the vote a bit tonight and got people energetic and angry and excited. But I think Ryan also did what he had to do, which was step up against someone who was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, someone who has a strong role in Obama foreign policy. Ryan has almost no background in foreign policy, and yet he held his own. So I thought both of them, in a sense, did what they needed to do.
What do you think of this Republican attack on the Obama administration and the State Department's handling of the attack in Libya a month ago on September 11th? It seems the story has changed. On the day, it was another one of these protests against the anti-Islamic film, and a terrorist attack kind of went in underneath that. Now they say, well, actually, there was no protest there. It was just a terrorist attack. Now, they're being accused of a cover-up. The likes of Charles Krauthammer, right-wing columnist, is saying that this is Watergate all over again. Is this going to have some mileage? Could this make a difference in November?
I don't think this issue will, because I don't think there is a cover-up. I think it's a miscommunication. It's similar in many ways. You remember when Obama first announced the killing of Osama. You remember that in those first few days, even though this was the biggest news story of the year probably, they didn't get their story straight. You remember the story leaked out in different ways, and this one feels like that to me. So I don't think it has enormous traction, but having said that, it's a very powerful statement when the United States cannot protect the life of its ambassadors. So it is a strong attack point for the Republicans. Even if Obama wins, one interesting side question will be, what does this do to Susan Rice's chances of becoming Secretary of State? She is you'll know, his ambassador to the United Nations. She was the person who came out most vocally initially to say this was protests and so on, as opposed to an Al-Qaeda attack. She's received a lot of Republican attacks. So whether that affects her chances of taking over from Hillary will be interesting.
I do suspect as well there's probably an element of them the Republicans trying to build a narrative of Obama equals Jimmy Carter, trying to talk about embassies in the Middle East as much as they possibly can to try and draw the comparisons. What about, when we talk about Syria, like they mentioned Syria a little bit during the debate, Romney talked a lot about Syria during the week, during his foreign policy speech. That seems to be one area of genuine difference between the candidates. Would you agree there's an area of difference or not?
No, I wouldn't really, because
he's trying to make it seem like
for sure. And look, both of them are doing that. Both of them are exaggerating the differences. They're ramping up the rhetoric. They're trying to make it clear that the two sides are worlds apart. But on Syria, what Romney said in his speech at the Virginia Military Institute was that we should help to make sure that the Syrian rebels who share our values get arms. He didn't say we will give them arms. He said we should help them get arms. And if you read all the New York Times reporting and other reporting, it seems that the Americans are already helping through their partners to make sure that some of the rebels get arms. And Romney also gave himself, secondly, this caveat: it should get to the rebels who share our values. So again, it's another caveat. So again, I think it's a distinction, without a difference.
But this notion of the right rebels, the rebels that share our values, this is all kind of harking back to Egypt and the criticism that says, well, yes, when Mubarak went, there was an opportunity for Obama to make sure we had our hand on the shoulder of the replacement, and we lost that opportunity, and that's where there is a failure of leadership in the region.
And I think the Middle East is one area where you talk to a lot of people in the region and they will say that America has stepped back in some way, and that it doesn't have the same influence that it once did, that Middle East regimes are constantly calculating national strength and national interest, and they look at the way Obama's handled himself in some areas and they say there's been a bit of a diminution. But again, look, I think there are important differences on issues like Russia, on issues like Israel, on the United Nations.
The defence budget as well.
The defence budget. the defence budget if Romney could ever afford to go ahead with the plans that he's putting on the table. But on those things, I think there are differences. But on other issues, on Afghanistan, even on China, it sounds when you first look at it like there's a big difference. When you look at the interstices of the policies, some of those differences melt away. And when you squint your eyes and look at Romney, and you look at his history as the Liberal governor of Massachusetts, as a private equity executive, to me, he feels more like George H.W. Bush than he does like George W. Bush. Can you really see Romney muscling up to Beijing and starting a clash of civilizations, or acting in a very instinctive, intuitive way like George W. Bush did? Myself, I don't see it. I think of him more as a bit of a calculator, eating data, thinking with his head, not with his gut.
That may well have been the case, but in 2008, I wouldn't have described Obama as a drone warrior, but that's what happened. Do you think that what the Romney we're seeing now is the Romney we'd get in 2 or 3 years' time?
That's a good question, and it depends on events, and it depends on the personnel that he puts into positions. I mean, if he were to put John Bolton into the State Department in Foggy Bottom rather than, say, Bob Zellick, then that would change my calculations. But to go back to 2008, you wouldn't have picked Obama necessarily as a drone warrior, but he did set some... when you look at Obama's personality, he, like Romney, does come across along the long term as a cautious, deliberate sort of person, not a rush to judgment guy. And I guess that's the judgment I'm making about Romney too.
Well, Michael Fullilove, always good to see you here. Thank you very much for joining us at the Roundish Table this week.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. And that is just about all the time we have for another edition of Planet America. Next week, we're going to have a wrap of the second presidential debate in New York. It is a town hall-style debate. And we'll also have a look at just how much of an impact the negative attack ads that we've been seeing in this program and right throughout this campaign are actually having.
Well, they're making me hate life. But to take us out, Paul Ryan may not have won the debate outright, but he sure won some hearts. And someone gave those hearts access to a YouTube account. See you later.
Bye now.
Ray rocks. I can see the debt disappearing even now. Camelot's back and Reagan's really proud. Paul Ryan. Ooh, baby, you ain't a lion. Inside, I think I'm dying.